Well, certainly if you're a business owner, intellectual property that is not officially a patent or not officially a trade secret as determined by the U.S. government or awarded by the U.S. government, if you put that in an open Amazon, you've lost all trade secret protection to the extent you ever had.
What human ethical changes that you see has not changed while all these different shifts?
Well, what has not changed is the law. The law that governs the internet that was passed in 1996, and it's still the law. All of those companies cannot be held liable for any illegal content that goes up on their site.
Technology moves fast, but in the race to scale AI, too many leaders are flying blind, trapped in a roadmap void. Today we are cutting through the fluff. My guest is the voice of compliance himself, Thomas Fox. A former General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer, he is a 40-year legal veteran, author of 39 books, and a visionary founder of a multi-award-winning compliance podcast network. We are stripping away the buzzwords to find real business solutions to compliance problems. How do you protect your business, lead with ethics, and align for real, lasting impact? Let's welcome Tom Fox. If compliance needs to align with the speed of business, how can then leaders make decisions in such a situation so that scaling is not compromised?
You cannot be Dr. No from the land of no.
Tom, AI has changed our lives big time over the last couple of years. We're giving a lot of private information, business information to agents. Are we setting up our comparables with our data? Are we training them? Where is that risk involved? How are we dealing with that?
Well, can I maybe start with your adjective big time? Because AI has changed things, but in many ways, AI is an extension of what previously existed. And let me give you an example. The first time I opened ChatGPT, I felt the joy, awe, and wonder that I felt when I was 12 years old and my parents bought my sister and I Encyclopedia Britannica. That was a huge gift for me. I literally had the entire world, A to Z, in front of me in books. That's what I felt like with ChatGPT, that I had a resource that I could ask a question with instantly. Maybe don't have as much awe and wonder now as I did the first time I used it, but that experience really has led my thinking that the problems you articulated, we had those problems before. We had problems with intellectual property rights. We had problems with data privacy rights. And now we just have them greater and at much greater speed. If I had a solution for AI, why can't I use that at least as a basis to consider a possible solution now? And so the problems you articulated, I think, are fair questions to ask. But it's not as if we've never had a solution to intellectual property issues. It's not as if we've never had a solution to data privacy issues. And we just have to think through what is happening now with inputting data into an open model, large language model, or other open model source. And what are the negative implications of that? Now, we have seen certainly negative implications of that. Many famous authors have essentially lost the copyrights on their books because ChatGPT or some other AI inputted the books. Now, they were in the public record. Those books are to be sold. And so, in my mind, well, if you sell a book and somebody copies it, well, except you kind of put the book out there. I really don't view that as critically. But the question you pose is even a more interesting question because is my intellectual property, what's up here inside of Tom Fox's head, is that now been stolen? Is it being used? Is it being used in ways I don't know? Am I being cited or credited for things I did or didn't do that I don't know about that somebody else is getting an answer to? And those questions, I think, trouble me a little bit more because it's not simply that it's a black box of how the decision is made, but in many ways, it's a black box of how the information is even used.
You are coming here like very long experience on the compliance and legal aspect of intellectual property. What are those areas that everyone should be aware of when sharing information, and like how to keep track? Even sometimes, like whenever we sign up for a service, we go through the terms of use, big long copies, nobody reads those. But are there any areas at least we can keep check on, at least for the minimum, to make sure our IP is protected?
Well, certainly if you're a business owner and you have intellectual property that is not officially a patent or not officially a trade secret as determined by the U.S. government or awarded by the U.S. government, meaning it's a trade secret you're trying to keep confidential. If you put that in an open ammo, you've lost all trade secret protection to the extent you ever had. And so, in my mind, the answer is training your employees. It's almost like a ransomware training session. If it looks suspicious, dump it. Go ask somebody. My wife and I both work from home, and twice a week, I'm like, honey, what do you think about this email? And if she says, don't open it, don't report it. And a second set of eyes on anything. So training is critical for intellectual property protection. What happens if let's use the author example. One of my favorite authors is a gentleman named David Baldacci. He writes mystery thrillers. And he testified in front of Congress that he felt like he had been essentially intellectually violated because his books had been put into an open AI without his knowledge. And now the answer is, and what I would say to you is, I could take his book, copy his language, but if I put as written by David Baldacci in this book, then I properly cite it to him. And if we could train AI that the information that is coming from those books, if you use it as an answer in a proper citation, that's probably going to be acceptable. I don't think AI is there yet. But to businesses, it's absolutely critical that you train your employees not to do that the same way you would train them not to open up a suspicious email.
That's true. Emails, even links that we see online, social media posts, a lot of triggers that we should be very careful about. Your over 40 years of law history, your career, and in that time, there's major transformations happen, telecom, internet, cloud, blockchain. I mean, everything has changed over the last 30, 40 years. And now we are dealing with AI. What human ethical changes that you see has not changed while all these different shifts?
Well, what has not changed is the law. We are still operating with a legal framework. For instance, you mentioned, you said .com. Well, let's take the internet. The internet law, the law that governs the internet, that was passed in 1996, I think, and it's still the law. So that law has not changed.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that law said that the Metas, the Googles, back then it was AOLs, all of those companies cannot be held liable for any illegal content that goes up on their sites. Period. They're just a pass-through almost. So it's clear that law needs to be changed.
Right.
But in terms of, we're still operating under intellectual property laws that were written 100 years ago. I mentioned the trade secret. I used to do trade secret law cases in this state. And one of the requirements was that you had to maintain the secrecy of your whatever it is you wanted to maintain secret. And of course, in America, the biggest trade secret is the formula Coca-Cola. That's never been patented. They've never asked the government for any official recognition. And no one still knows the formula for Coke, or very few people inside of the company. And that's because they kept it locked and safe. Well, it's difficult to do that in the digital age for all of the reasons you mentioned. Offsite storage, the cloud, inadvertent emails, whatever it may be. And if you do one of those, you're going to lose that intellectual property. Well, now If somehow somebody at Coke put the formula inadvertently in OpenAI, they would lose that trade secret protection. So we're operating under some cases laws over 100 years old, but we need to update our laws. The flip side of that is you'd have to have a framework that's broad enough and flexible enough to handle the day-by-day changes that are going on in every OpenAI. I think I heard on a podcast this morning that Anthropic has 2 releases a week of updates. I'm a ChatGPT user, and it's probably once a month. We went from 5.2 to 5.3 to 5.4 I'm on, and that's happened within the past 2 weeks. So how are we going to create a law, leaving aside the political environment? How are we going to create a law that's going to be flexible enough to protect whatever it is we decide is the most important to protect tomorrow, let alone today?
You had been doing great in your law career. What made you think to pivot into compliance evangelist side of it? Like, you are running your own podcast network, you are talking big time on compliance, and you have been thought leader into this space. Like, what made you shift from, I mean, lawyers make good money. What made you think to move into this now?
I'm a recovering trial lawyer. I did that for 25 years. Then I went in-house and I did contracts at Halberd. And I worked, negotiated contracts all over the world. Lived in Dubai, traveled literally around the world 3 or 4 times a year, just negotiating contracts. And I was able to use that job as leverage to become a general counsel at another company in 2007, another company in the energy space. And that company had violated the U.S. law, which prevents U.S. companies from engaging in bribery or corruption outside the United States. And back then, you didn't start your remediation until you had resolved the case with the government. Now the procedure's reversed. You remediate, then you resolve your case with the government. At any rate, I came on board. I was part of the new management team, and we had to build a compliance program in this company. The company got sold, my job went away. And so I decided what I really wanted to do with my life, I was 50 years old, was race bicycles. So I went off on some great adventure to race bicycles. Until about a year later, I was on a training ride and I had taken out by a Hummer. And that ended my cycle career. And so after 6 months or so, hospitalizations and all that, when I had enough energy to get on my walker and toddle into my office at home, I had some very long conversations with myself about what did I want to do next. Because when you have that kind of life-changing event, you do tend to think about, what do I really want to do in my life? And I decided that what I had really enjoyed in my past job was building compliance programs inside of corporations. It's something I was very comfortable with. It's something I can do. And this is now 2010. There were very few lawyers at that time in private practice who did that. Lawyers in private practice usually just did investigations. I wasn't interested in doing that. Plus, I couldn't leave the house, or the only time I could leave the house was to go to physical therapy. So I couldn't, do this. I couldn't have met you at Sioux Falls or be, Crazy Horse. Couldn't go have a drink. I couldn't go to dinner. I couldn't go to a conference. And literally, I had no clients. I had no income. And the only thing I had was time. So I figured out what I wanted to do. And then I started exploring social media, which at that point in my life, I knew nothing about. Actually, Twitter back then was a great business. It was 2010. Yeah, social media was just building up. My daughter was, I think, 14 or 15, and I told her, if you could sign me up for a Facebook page in 24 hours, I'd give you $100. Well, 20 minutes later, she came to me and said, okay, Dad, your signing up. And the moral of that story is always hire an expert. You're going to do social media, get your teenager to do it. Anyway, so I started Twitter and LinkedIn, and I started blogging. I'd always written a lot as a lawyer, so started blogging, and I started blogging about the nuts and bolts of compliance. How do you build compliance programs? And so I styled myself as the nuts and bolts guy. And literally within 6 months, I had a worldwide consulting practice at my house, never having left my house, in the nuts and bolts of building compliance programs. And the only mistake I made was I did not trademark the phrase working from home. Because if I'd done that, I would be a very rich man. But I did. But I was the original work from home guy, simply because I was laid up. And I didn't have really life-threatening injuries, but I was just banged up internally, and it bruised organs and things like that, and they just took forever to heal. So that's how I got started. And the reason I selected it, in addition to just I enjoyed that work, was I'm a big believer that corporations have a role in saving the world, saving the planet, whatever you choose to call it. And you can be responsible as a corporation and still make money. Texans, we talk about making money all the time. We're not offended by that. Unlike many other people in the United States, they're reluctant to talk about money, not that here. And so we're very comfortable with a profit-driven business. And I realized that I could do good in the world. And all lawyers start out wanting to do good, even if you don't. We all start out with good intentions. So I could actually make the world a little bit better place, because the world loses $3 trillion annually to the international scourge of bribery and corruption. The corporations are a big part of that, because everyone's paying the bribes to get the contracts. And if I can help prevent any company from doing that, I view that as a positive. So I'm very passionate about compliance. I'm very passionate about anti-bribery and anti-corruption.
It's a good subject. People don't pay attention to that, but that's what gets you into trouble.
Right. And so that's why I became in ancient Greece, an evangelist is the bringer of good news. So my good news is there is a solution to the international scourge of bribery and corruption through compliance. So that's how I got the name Compliance Evangelist.
It's awesome. And that's the thing you wrote 40 books too.
Well, since 2010. I've done all of that since 2010.
What's your favorite part of writing books? Is it a hobby, or you still, it's like your contribution towards the domain?
I can just tell you, I've always loved, well, in high school, we used to call them research papers.
That's right.
In college, we called them, but, I have a master's thesis.
Theses, projects.
Yeah. And I just finished a massive book. I've been doing this since I was in high school. I'll read something, I'll synthesize it, and I write it in my own words, and that's just the process. And what I discovered with blogging was that if you put enough blogs together, you have a book.
You put 100 blogs together, kind of a book, the content.
Exactly. And then I started podcasting was a natural extension of the blogging, because it was a marketing effort, to market myself as a compliance consultant. And so everything I do is geared towards, at the end of the day, it'll be a book. So I take a blog, I can take 5 blogs in 1 week. Now I've got a white paper. I can take 4 weeks in 1 month, writing 5 days a week. Well, I have a chapter now. So in November, I've got a book. And then all I have to do, now I've edited it once, so I have to edit it again, but I don't have to sit down from scratch and write a book in November for delivery on January 1. I've written it all the way through, and I have to edit it.
Yeah, to make it like a book, right? It has to connect. Do you manage your content calendar in such a way so you have book by the end of the year, or you just keep writing and then collate it together to create a book-like story?
It is the former. Everything I do is geared towards, in 2017, I think I published the first edition of my handbook was published. So I wrote the definitive compliance handbook, and every year I update it, and I try to think about topics that I need to go into. I just turned in the 7th edition, which would be published in late April or early May. I turned in my final revisions. So everything is, geared towards an update to the handbook. Sherlock Holmes, Lessons for Compliance Professionals, or Compliance Lessons from Sherlock Holmes, the novels. Because they're 4 novels. They're really novellas. They're relatively short, about 125 pages. So I did a 4-part podcast series on each novel, 4 different chapters, and now I've got a book out of that. And the books I'm working on now, I got interested in the philosophical underpinnings of ethics and compliance programs. So I did a series on Greek philosophers. I've done a series on Roman philosophers. I'm going to do a series on medieval philosophers, and then I'll do a series on modern day philosophers.
So you're bringing their ethical theories towards modern compliance.
And showing how things we do today, compliance, are actually Socrates talked about, or Plato talked about, or Aristotle wrote about, or Marcus Aurelius, a Roman. So, yes.
So that connecting to this, because and I like your way of approaching a book, because write the book is a big initiative. It's a big responsibility. I've been thinking about it for years and working on it for months. And but I already have a lot of content in blogs and articles and like various places, white papers, key books. There's a lot of content I already have.
The secret to writing a book is my daughter, when she was 7, she wrote her first book. And at that point, I had not, this is like 06 or something. I'd never written a book. So how did you do that, honey? Well, she said, Dad, it's easy to sit down and write. I went, why didn't I think of that? Well, see, I'm writing every day. All of those blogs I'm writing. And if you sit and think, oh my God, I gotta write 200 pages, you'll never get done. But if you start writing today, by the middle of November, you'll have 200 pages. All you can do is write 1 page a day. So it's just a repetitive process, continual writing, and I've just got it down to a process.
You have a chief compliance officer.
Yes.
Secretaries. How many other chief compliance officers you meet? Because I don't see this title in CCO a lot lately. And that's a problem.
It is a problem. Every company has a chief compliance officer. This should. They're required to by law. Because you have to have a compliance program.
Some have legal officers, some have different name. But again, it's the same thing, but I haven't seen many.
Well, we're all out there. A lot of us. What you have articulated, though, is the real problem. Because it doesn't matter who you are, if nobody knows and you don't have the authority to say no when you have to, that's a problem for a company. Now, there's still a debate on whether the General Counsel can be the chief compliance officer or should be. The government has never given us guidance on that question. The issue is the role of a General Counsel is very different than the role of a chief compliance officer. The role of a General Counsel is to protect the company, sometimes at all costs. The role of chief compliance officer is to prevent, detect, and remediate, basically find problems and fix them. Hopefully before they become a legal issue, but if they do become a legal issue, after they become a legal issue. You can't protect the company, because if you try to hide a problem, like paying a bribe, it's just going to continue. You're going to pay more bribes, and you're going to have more trouble. So, very different roles.
To push business out of, okay, just one mistake, any single big mistake can make business run out, right? And any compliance problem, big or small, eventually be harmful. What do you think about like most typical those smaller problems other than these hiding mistakes? What are the other common problems that businesses make that can eventually hit back and that do damage to the business?
Every U.S. public company, meaning they have their own stock exchange, whether it's NASDAQ, whether it's New York Stock Exchange now, Texas as a stock exchange. You have to have a compliance program by law. So this is not something that's unknown. And in the compliance realm, there are zero trade secrets. Everybody knows how to do compliance. There's 8 steps that apply to any regulation to any country in the world. And so how to do it is relatively well known. It all comes down to, is management willing to do the right thing? Or as we would say, compliance tone at the top. If management is willing to do the right thing, do business ethically in compliance, then you'll probably have a company that either has a very deep compliance program which detects problems before they become illegal violations, or they don't come up because people know what the rules are and they don't violate them. But the backbone of the compliance program are internal controls, and there are financial controls. Those are mandated, once again, for U.S. public companies after Enron and WorldCom in a law called Sarbanes-Oxley. So they're called SOX controls. That's the name of the law. And every company has to have SOX controls. Well, those compliance controls are essentially SOX controls. So you already have to have the controls in place. We know what the controls are. It's basically a second set of eyes on something. If you have a policy and you have a procedure to implement that policy, if you follow that policy, you're not going to violate the law. Where companies get into trouble is when they have an exception or go outside that policy, and they don't have an appropriate level of management oversight to say and give a good business justification. So the typical example would be almost all companies get into trouble in bribery, corruption around third parties. So whether that's a commissioned sales agent, whether it's a distributor or somebody else who gets a percentage income from the sale, part of that money is used to go to pay a bribe. And how that agent was selected and trained are critical elements. And if you don't follow the typical procedures that you have to follow, which everybody knows what they are, then that's when companies get in trouble.
But these are big things. Mostly like when companies are trying to scale it, chasing targets, especially fiscal year end goals, meeting numbers. That's when bad decisions happen in rationing. Like, okay, we'll deal with that later, and we'll never come back and deal with that. Right, to that, and things just keep growing in the back burner, and that helps. Of course, it helps with scalability, but it also adds up to the problem area. How to make sure in this case, like, okay, workarounds are okay for the time being because it's targeting top line growth and also at the same time meeting how the ecosystem goes. How can then leaders make decisions in such a situation though, so that scaling is not compromised to stay compliant?
You have to have, first of all, compliance has to act and run at the speed of business. You cannot be Dr. No from the land of no. You can't be the land of business non-development. You have to support the business, and you have to try to give them the tools so that they can do business ethically in compliance. And if you don't, they're not going to come to you when a problem might arise. So you try to develop a good relationship through persuasion and with tactics that demonstrate to the business that are there in their interest. And so if a problem arises, hopefully they'll come to you before a problem arises, because then you have more time to solve it. But if they do create a problem, chastise them, castigate them. You say, okay, how can we resolve a problem? You can still get the deal done. It maybe have to be in the next quarter. I understand, that we didn't get to book that revenue this quarter, but you'll get to book it next quarter, and maybe that's okay.
Then, if compliance needs to align with the speed of business, AI is making business going super aggressive. It's like Formula One speed, right? It's changing every month, like you're saying, like Anthropic and ChatGPT. I mean, if it is not twice a week, at least it's 2-3 times a month. They're changing their model, and everything is had to be updated, and you need to relearn on some things. And There are trillions of dollars being spent on AI growth, and every business wants to keep up. In this situation, there's a lot of compromises happening with terms to compliance and legal aspect.
I would suggest that the responsibility is on compliance. The responsibility on compliance is to move at the speed of business. But I see the opportunity with AI to allow compliance to do that. So let me go back to my sales agent example because that's where the most companies get in trouble most. Well, it used to take a minimum of 2, but usually 4 weeks to get a sales agent approved through any large company's process. Well, 4 weeks could be a lifetime in a corporation. What if you could do that in 24 hours? And why can't compliance use AI to speed that process up so that compliance is moving at the speed of business? Because you're absolutely right. If compliance doesn't pick their game up, business is not going to pay attention to them anymore. And so I wrote a whole book on that theme, which was it's compliance has to step their game up and compliance has to move at the speed of business. And I mentioned that 8 things or so that every compliance program has to have 8 elements. Every one of those elements has to incorporate AI so they can literally move at the speed of business going forward.
But typically, it's lawyers who challenge AIs and they make the process super slow. I have seen, especially procurement teams and legal approval teams for data privacy and data sharing, data protection, and all those policies in the organizations make the process slower on the compliance requirement. And your argument is super right to have them also be AI enabled so they can adopt that speed as well. But it's a mindset.
In many ways, it's a mindset, and I understand the legal mindset, but there are protections, risk management strategies you can utilize to put in place to protect your intellectual property, to prevent personal identifiable information or, heaven forbid, personal health information from getting into an AI or something else, that it would become public. You can put protections around that, and you can still operate quickly because the role of compliance with a sales agent is to determine if there are any red flags present or basically anything in their past which would suggest they're not going to do business ethically and in compliance for us going forward. And once you get past that, then it's just a matter of putting a contract in place, training them on your program, your compliance program, and then monitoring them going forward. So if you can reduce that time from 4 weeks to 48 hours, a business can utilize that and move forward. You can never be 100% sure that someone's not going to violate the law because we're human. And sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we make bad decisions. But in that case, what you want to have are your internal controls to detect that. And so it gets flagged and you could hopefully stop it before it becomes a legal violation or something much, much worse.
Yeah, I did a CEO of a legal tech company on the podcast, and she has actually developed an AI to review contracts and gives scores based on different dimensions, like if it is customer friendly, employee friendly, business friendly, and they had different scaling scoring system on AI. And yeah, but again, it's a mindset. But if it is a technology like this is used, it's gonna save a lot of time. But I mean, of course, it's you just do not trust that blindly. Do your due diligence after that, but it's still gonna do 80% of your job.
If you can utilize AI for a process, that's where I see the true efficiency. But a process only identifies then things sort of if yes, go here. If no, go here. But if you get a no, then you're going to have to do additional investigation. And that's where the human comes in. And the human has to make the decision. Is it yes or is it no? So we can get to that process and the human can make the decision more quickly and more efficiently.
You talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, compliance specialists on your podcast, even outside that. Any good story or success story using AI companies have to improve their operational efficiency and done remarkable improvement on overall speed and quality of.
Actually, I learned the most about that while writing my book on AI because I decided to research business case studies from the Harvard magazine and then the MIT Sloan magazine, or law review articles that talked about the use of AI that could be as an example for compliance. And I was stunned to find examples from as far back as 2015. Now, they didn't call it AI in 2015. They called it computer assisted. Then it became machine learning. But it was AI. And what I've learned from that, and the clearest example was the bank, Citibank, had a massive scandal 15 years ago around money laundering. And so the bank made the decision that they were going to look at every transaction that with the bank, not suspicious transactions, which used to be 10,000, they're now 5,000, but literally every transaction. And so they built a bespoke money laundering transaction monitoring system that cost over $1 billion to monitor every transaction in their bank. The thing that AI has given us is that system that Citibank built for itself or had built, that's now available to your company for $25,000 a year. Or you might be able to buy an entire one for $100,000. So AI has scaled the price down to where every company can have one of those. And so you have a much more efficient overall system of companies that perhaps before didn't think they could afford a money laundering system or anti-money laundering system. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, because we all have, fraud, waste, and abuse. And I never really thought about what those three terms mean, but they are very different terms. Fraud is one thing, waste is one thing, and abuse is one thing. And I found in my book that Shell had, obviously they have oil rigs on a worldwide basis, some offshore, some onshore. And they had a 18-month routine maintenance where they bring a rig out of production and go through it and do routine maintenance and then put it back in production. Well, they used AI to look at every factor they could that impacted a rig. So offshore Nigeria, they would actually took the entire time they were there, model the weather every day to determine the humidity levels, the wind levels, the sea levels, and every other place that rig had been. And so they were able to develop a maintenance program specific to each rig. And it could be 24 months or it could be 12 months. And it turned out they saved hundreds of millions of dollars because they had a bespoke maintenance program, or not maintenance program, but a program to determine when maintenance was needed. That's the waste and fraud, waste, and abuse. And I gave that example. There's a large auditors conference I spoke at, and somebody came up to me and he said, I've got to start auditing the repair records of our service trucks next month. I never thought of it this way. And so it made him realize we could do the same thing for our truck. It doesn't have to be your offshore rigs. If you've got a fleet of 5 vans, maybe you could take that to a more customized maintenance program for your own cars or your own vehicles and save money that way. So that was also a very powerful example to me as well. So, and Shell developed back in 2017, and they were running with what we used to call a computer programmer. And now you have AI that can do, AI can go back and look, say, give me every humidity reading offshore Nigeria at this location in 2017. And you can get that now from AI.
Yeah, this AI actually really have made a lot of things do faster, easier. It's just that like compliance side or data sharing that we have to be very, very diligent with where are we sharing, how we are sharing, and how the policies are already at individual level and at business level, it's customer information protection and all that. What is data saying the next big risk? in the new economy that we are creating?
Well, it's not the data that's saying it, it's the volatility. Because in addition to this being probably the fastest pace of change, technological change, unfortunately, we have great volatility from the political side. We have great volatility from geopolitical side. A month ago, if you had told me F1 was going to cancel their signature race in Dubai, I would have laughed at you. Well, they did that today because of
They have a park in Dubai.
yeah, and they canceled the day because of the war. And I'm terrified to say it, but I'm sure the next incursion will be in Cuba. What does that mean for shipping through the from the Caribbean to the Atlantic? That's a major shipping route for certainly oil tankers coming out of Texas, but also other shipping. I had the luck when Obama was president and there was a brief opening. I went to Cuba. It was one of my goals in life was to go to Cuba. And I remember looking at a map of Cuba, and I don't know why it never dawned on me that island is the furthest west or east in the Caribbean and west in the Atlantic. And it sits right over northern Latin America. And I'm like, this is the perfect shipping point. Either east, west, north, and south. No wonder the Spanish did what they did and saw the value in Cuba. So the volatility of change now, like yesterday, the Trump administration lifted sanctions on Russia because of the war in Iran. We can debate whether that was a good thing or not, but the volatility now is just unbelievable. And you have to have a framework in place that's broad enough to allow you to manage that volatility. Like I said, 2 weeks ago, if you were at F1, you probably weren't concerned about losing one of your most prestigious races in the world.
Yeah, volatility and uncertainty.
And volatility leads directly to uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely right. That was the big ones. From the digital aspect in businesses, we do have several assessment tools where we check, okay, where the business stands as of now on the digital maturity scale. How can a business measure what is their compliance standard is right now against the regulatory requirements required to align with? I mean, are there frameworks? Are there any tools available that where businesses can start becoming more serious towards compliance?
Fortunately, we're very well served in that arena because the U.S. Department of Justice has provided exactly what you have articulated to us. And they have a document called the Evaluation of Corporate Compliance Programs. And it is just that. Now, it's designed for the use of prosecutors in developing cases, but it's the same process that you need to use to evaluate your compliance program. So you can use that document. There are 2 handbooks for compliance, also put out by the Department of Justice, that are very helpful. There is, I mentioned internal controls several times. There's an organization called Coso, C-O-S-O, and Coso in 2013 put out its framework for internal controls and its compliance controls. So since that time, you've had the exact framework, and the government adopted the Coso framework, so that's the right framework to use. And so if you're wondering whether your internal controls are sufficient or insufficient, all you have to do is go through each control in the Coso framework and see if you'd have a corresponding control in your own compliance program. So the frameworks are in place to do it. You just have to take the time to do so.
Okay, so this is a good starting point, and having like better compliance standard with your business is better to perform also, like because you have better trust with your customers, with government, and those companies outperform who are lower in the scale of compliance requirements. And these tools are good frameworks available to determine like where you stand on the scale. And this is very, very important to measure where you are so you can make your improvement roadmap. And having a compliance officer, chief compliance officer, chief legal officer on the C-suite is a good example to showcase that businesses are serious about the compliance.
It is, and it also improves the standing of compliance within the corporation if they're seen as a C-suite member. And the key is that compliance would have access to the board of directors if there's a problem. So it's the authority and it is the prestige of the compliance position within the corporation that's critical.
What is that final message you want to give to C-suite today regarding compliance and legal standards?
There's a company called Ethisphere, and Ethisphere annually assesses corporations and gives an award for companies that have superior compliance programs. The Ethisphere, and they've been doing this since 2008, and what they've been able to do is measure the delta between companies that receive the Ethisphere, they call it the world's most ethical company award, their profitability against the S&P 500. Now, I recognize that's a standard, and it may be not, it's an average. That's the S&P, it's an average.
Okay.
But
It's a benchmark.
a benchmark. And since the first year I looked at that in 2009, the delta was 4.5% higher companies who have been awarded the world's most ethical company award than the S&P 500. And I thought, 4.5%, that's incredible. No one, how do you do that? And it was that every year. So by 10 years, the difference was nearly 20%. And that's continued. So from the financial perspective, Ethisphere has demonstrated to us that you will be more profitable than the standard average. In 2018, a George Washington business professor did a study of, he looked at 16,000 internal whistleblower reports at one company. They're a hotline company, so that was their business. And they agreed to allow him to review the reports anonymously to see if he could determine what the financial impact was. And so this was the first time we had financial analysis along those lines. And what he found was the results were stunning. He found that companies that had a culture of speak up, which meant you could report a concern and not be retaliated for it, they had a 5% difference in their overall legal and regulatory fines. So in the accounting world, that's called a material difference, 5%. Well, think about what 5% is at Exxon. I mean, that's hundreds of millions of dollars. And that really got a lot of people's attention because it was the first time we had seen the true academic report look at that. But then he went on to find that if you have a culture of speak up and you listened, i.e. listen up, we call it, that employees will come forward with new and different innovative ideas and will make the companies even more profitable, leaving aside the issue of regulatory compliance because they feel safe. And so he was able to demonstrate greater profitability for those companies because they were taking employees' innovative ideas forward. So now we've had at least two, we got the Ethisphere information, we had this academic study, and it's pretty clear to me that the numbers, the financial numbers for those companies that have a true compliance program in place are much better than those that don't.
That's important. That is very important. Yeah, normally, it's undermined, as we discussed earlier, about behind numbers and prioritization and just chasing goals. Thank you, Don. Great conversation. Really enjoyed it. All right. Thank you.
Hope you got what you look. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on this episode. As I look back over our journey so far, I'm struck by something far more significant than our metrics. I'm struck by the caliber of the conversations we have built together. To you, our viewers, thank you. Your time is the most valuable asset you own, and the fact that you choose to spend it here. I do not take it lightly, and I do everything possible in my control to create the value content for you. At this show, we are not interested in winning the race for volume. We are committed to quality over quantity. Our goal is not to fill your feed, but to fuel your perspective. We are building a platform focused on big picture insights that actually move the needle in your life and your career. We are still in our early chapters, and I'm grateful to have you with us as we build something designed to last. Thank you for your trust and your continued support. If you value this perspective and our agenda, I invite you to subscribe and join us in building this mission. Thank you.